Have you ever noticed how something that should feel natural can leave you feeling off? Not guilty, not ashamed, just disconnected. Like you did something for yourself, but somehow ended up further from yourself. Here's what most men don't realize. What you do in the 15 minutes after masturbation can quietly shape how you feel about yourself for the rest of the day. Not because masturbation itself is wrong, but because the patterns we fall into afterward can either ground us or leave us feeling hollow. And if you're over 40, you've probably noticed this more clearly than you did at 25. You're more aware now, more tuned in to what leaves you feeling solid versus what leaves you feeling scattered. In this conversation, I'm going to walk you through 5 specific things you should avoid doing right after masturbation. Not because they're morally wrong, but because they quietly erode your confidence, your energy, and your sense of presence. And I'll explain why each one matters using real research and patterns I've seen across thousands of men. By the end, you'll have a clearer sense of how to integrate this part of your life in a way that actually supports who you're becoming, not who you were, who you're becoming. If this topic resonates with you, comment yes. If not, comment no. I read every comment and it helps me understand what matters to you. Before we go further, I want to ask something simple. If this kind of conversation feels rare to you, consider subscribing. Not because I need the numbers, but because it tells me you value depth over distraction. And it helps this reach other men who are looking for the same thing. Hit the bell if you want to be part of these conversations as they come out. Now, let's get into it. Number 1, don't immediately scroll through your phone. Here's the pattern. You finish, you reach for your phone, you open Instagram or YouTube or the news, and within 60 seconds, you're absorbing someone else's reality, someone else's urgency, someone else's highlight reel. What just happened? You had a moment of release. Your nervous system was wide open, and instead of letting yourself settle, you flooded your brain with stimulation. According to research from the University of California, Irvine, it takes an average of 23 minutes to fully refocus after a digital interruption. But the issue here isn't just focus, it's presence. When you immediately reach for your phone after a private, vulnerable moment, you're training yourself to avoid being alone with yourself. You're teaching your brain that stillness is uncomfortable. And over time, that pattern doesn't just affect your post-masturbation routine. It affects your ability to be present in conversations, in intimacy, in your own life. I've seen this play out in men who describe feeling emotionally distant even when they're physically with someone they care about. And when we trace it back, it often starts with micro-avoidance, little moments where they chose distraction over presence. This is more common than you think. A 2023 survey by Common Sense Media found that adults check their phones an average of 344 times per day. That's once every 4 minutes. But the moments right after release, those are when your brain is most receptive, most open. If you fill that space with noise, you lose the opportunity to integrate what just happened, to feel grounded in your own body. So what should you do instead? Lie still for 2 minutes. Breathe. Let your system settle. You don't need to meditate or journal or make it a ritual. Just don't run. Number 2, don't judge yourself. This one's subtle, but it's also the most damaging. You finish, and within seconds, a quiet voice shows up. That was a waste of time. I should have been working. I should have more discipline. Or worse, what's wrong with me? Here's what that voice doesn't tell you. Self-judgment after masturbation isn't about masturbation. It's about how you've been taught to relate to your own body. And for many men over 40, that teaching came from a culture that framed male sexuality as something to control, suppress, or be ashamed of. Even if you don't consciously believe that anymore, the emotional residue is still there. Dr. Tara Brach, a psychologist who specializes in self-compassion, has written extensively about how shame thrives in silence. And one of the most common places it hides is in the moments right after we do something natural but private. Masturbation is not a moral failure. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not something you need to overcome. It's a normal part of human sexuality. And if you're using it as a way to regulate stress or to connect with your own body, that's not pathological. That's adaptive. But here's the trap. If you finish and immediately spiral into self-criticism, you're reinforcing a neural pathway that says pleasure equals shame. And that pathway doesn't stay confined to masturbation. It spreads. It shows up when you want to rest but feel guilty, when you want to enjoy something but tell yourself you don't deserve it, when you want intimacy but feel unworthy of it. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Sex Research found that men who reported higher levels of masturbation-related guilt also reported lower sexual satisfaction in relationships, not because they masturbated more, but because the guilt created emotional distance. So here's what I want you to try. Next time that voice shows up, just notice it. Don't fight it. Don't try to logic your way out of it. Just notice it. And then say something simple to yourself. I'm human. That's it. You don't need to convince yourself that masturbation is good or healthy or empowering. You just need to stop treating yourself like the enemy. Still with me? Comment 1 if this already makes sense. Number 3, don't immediately jump into productivity mode. This is especially common among high-functioning men. You finish, and your brain immediately says, okay, back to work. You open your laptop, you check your emails, you jump into the next task, and on the surface, this seems fine, responsible even. But here's what's actually happening. You're using productivity as a way to distance yourself from what just happened. You're treating release like something you need to compensate for. And over time, that creates a pattern where you can't let yourself simply be without immediately doing. According to research from the American Psychological Association, chronic overfunctioning, constantly staying busy to avoid discomfort, is one of the most common coping mechanisms in midlife, and it's directly linked to emotional burnout. Here's the truth. The 15 minutes after masturbation are not wasted time. They're integration time. Your body just went through a physiological process. Your nervous system released tension. Your brain flooded with oxytocin and dopamine. If you immediately override that with cortisol-driven productivity, you're short-circuiting the very benefit you were supposed to receive. You're telling your body, this moment doesn't matter. Move on. And your body listens. I've worked with men who describe feeling perpetually anxious even when their lives are objectively stable. And when we dig deeper, we find that they've trained themselves to never fully land, to never fully complete a cycle. They're always half transitioning, always half present. So what's the alternative? Give yourself 5 minutes, not to relax, just to exist. Let your breath return to normal. Let your thoughts settle. You'll be more focused afterward, not less. Number 4, don't go straight into heavy or emotionally charged conversations. This one catches a lot of men off guard. You finish, you feel a sense of calm, maybe an openness, and then your partner asks you something serious, or you check your phone and see a text that requires a real response, and suddenly you're in the middle of a conversation that needs your full attention. But here's the problem. You're not actually present yet. Your nervous system is still recalibrating, and what feels like openness is actually vulnerability without boundaries. Dr. John Gottman, who spent decades studying relationships, has found that timing is one of the underrated factors in communication quality. He's noted that people who engage in important conversations when they're physiologically activated, whether that's from stress, arousal, or even post-release, are far more likely to misread tone, react defensively, or say things they don't mean. And here's what makes this tricky. After masturbation, your oxytocin levels are elevated. That's the bonding hormone. It makes you feel connected, open, even generous. But it also lowers your ability to hold firm boundaries, to say no when you need to recognize when you're overextending yourself emotionally. I've seen this play out in men who describe feeling resentful in their relationships, but they can't quite pinpoint why. And when we look closer, we find a pattern. They agree to things they don't actually want to agree to. They absorb emotional labor they don't have the capacity for. And it often happens in moments when their defenses are down. Not because they're weak, but because they're neurochemically softer than usual. A 2021 study in the journal Psychoneuroendocrinology found that oxytocin, while often called the love hormone, can actually increase emotional reactivity in certain contexts, meaning you're more likely to feel things deeply, which sounds beautiful. But it also means you're more likely to take things personally, to overcommit, or to engage in conversations you're not emotionally prepared for. So here's the guideline. If someone wants to talk about something important and you've just finished masturbating, it's okay to say, "Give me 10 minutes." You don't need to explain why. You don't need to justify it. You just need to give yourself time to return to baseline. Because the best version of you in a conversation isn't the most open version, it's the most grounded version. If you're finding value so far, let me know in the comments. It helps me understand what resonates with you. Number 5, don't isolate yourself emotionally afterward. This one's the most subtle, and it's also the one that causes the most long-term damage. You finish, and instead of feeling connected to yourself, you feel separate, like you just did something alone for yourself, and now you're more alone than you were before. This isn't about physical isolation. You might be in a relationship, you might have people around you, but emotionally, you've just reinforced the idea that your sexuality exists in a separate compartment from the rest of your life. And over time, that compartment becomes a place you visit but never integrate. Here's what I mean. If every time you masturbate, you follow it with distance, whether that's shutting down, avoiding eye contact, or retreating into your own head, you're teaching yourself that sexual release and emotional connection can't coexist. And that belief doesn't stay confined to masturbation. It shows up in partnered sex. It shows up in intimacy. It shows up in how you relate to your own desires. Dr. Esther Perel, a therapist who specializes in modern relationships, has talked about how many men experience what she calls post-coital loneliness, not because they're physically alone, but because they've learned to associate sexual release with emotional withdrawal. And for men over 40, this pattern often intensifies because you're more aware now of what you're missing. You're more aware of the gap between physical satisfaction and emotional fulfillment. And if you're not careful, masturbation becomes something that widens that gap instead of narrowing it. A 2020 survey conducted across multiple online communities, including Reddit's relationship forums, found that one of the most common sources of relationship tension wasn't frequency of sex, it was emotional absence after sex. Partners described feeling like their significant other went somewhere else after intimacy, and many men, when asked, admitted they didn't know how to stay present. They didn't know how to let the openness linger. So here's what this looks like in practice. After you finish, instead of retreating, whether that's into your phone, into work, or into your own head, stay connected. If you're with a partner, don't immediately roll over or get up. If you're alone, don't immediately fill the space with distraction. Just stay. Not because you need to do anything, but because presence is a practice and the moments after release are when that practice matters most. You're teaching your nervous system, I don't have to run from this. I don't have to compartmentalize this. This is part of me, and I'm okay with that. And that shift, small as it sounds, changes everything. Quick check-in. Does this match what you've noticed in your own life? Comment yes or not really. So let's bring this together. The 5 things you should avoid after masturbation aren't about rules, they're about awareness. Don't immediately distract yourself because presence is a skill you build in private moments first. Don't judge yourself because shame doesn't make you better, it just makes you smaller. Don't jump into productivity because integration matters more than speed. Don't engage in heavy conversations too soon because boundaries protect the quality of your relationships. And don't isolate yourself emotionally because connection starts with how you relate to yourself. Here's what I want you to understand. You're not broken, you're not behind, you're not doing this wrong, but you are at a point in your life where the small patterns matter more than they used to, because you're building something now, not starting over. You're building. And the way you treat yourself in the private moments, the ones no one else sees, that's the foundation. If you've spent years rushing through those moments, avoiding them or judging them, it makes sense that you'd feel disconnected. Not because there's something wrong with you, but because you've been training yourself to disconnect. And the good news? That training can be reversed. Not overnight, but consistently, one moment at a time. What's one thing you've learned about yourself with age? I'd genuinely like to hear. Drop it in the comments, because these conversations matter most when they're shared. If this spoke to you, consider subscribing, not for me, but for yourself, because this kind of conversation doesn't happen everywhere. And if you found value here, there's a good chance you'll find value in what comes next. Share your thoughts below. I read them all, and I learn from them. See you in the next conversation.